Hey y'all, welcome to Scrappin with Sheri and page 14 in our project recipe book. Now we're going to be on project recipe number 5, and at first glance this one sort of intimidated me a little bit. I had a friend at my in-person crop this past weekend who actually did this, and she used the brocade chain border maker cartridge, made 2 beautiful pages of this, but I didn't have anything that really lent itself to looking this fancy. So my youngest son and his wife were away this past weekend in the mountains with some friends, and they sent me some pictures, and I decided, oh, I could make this work. Now, you know me, there are so many things about this that I won't be doing, mainly the mats because I'm matting in white, but there are a couple of other things I'm going to change up, and I'll talk you through that process. I'm going to be using pieces from the Nordic winter collection. That's what the greens look like. This has a brown on the back, and then this tan colored diamond with some green on the back. I also pulled a sheet of hot fudge cardstock because I have an idea floating in my head. So let's look at our directions first. It says use 2 sheets of tone-on-tone paper for the bases, and that's what I've pulled the green for. So I'm going to set those aside for right now. It tells us to use the brocade chain border maker cartridge. Now, it mentions chains specifically because they do 2 chains behind and a chain across, and then layer these 2. Now, a chain cartridge is one where it comes off your paper when you're finished with it. It just pops off. You don't have to cut it off. My problem is, for these particular pages, I didn't have a chain that I loved, as well as I love this snowflake frame punch. So I'm going to be using the snowflake frame punch and showing you how you can adapt this to a border maker cartridge that is not a chain cartridge. So let's do the cutting of this first. And when I look at this, their brocade chain is pieces A, U, T, and B and V. So let's look over here and see which ones those are. It's A and B and T, U, V. Now, these are cut out of a tone-on-tone paper. It's 3 punches and then 3 mats, because I'm not doing my mats out of my patterned paper, and I'm not doing the punch out of my patterned paper. This is going to be a little different for me. So let me do my punched borders first. And I did pull the white shimmer paper to do my snowflakes with. I wanted it to be just a little bit sparkly. If you've had the white shimmer before, you're going to notice that it's not real stark white. I mean, look at it up against this white paper. It looks so good with these beiges. So I felt like that would be a good piece to use here. So I'm going to need at least 3 of these out of the white, because I'm going to need 2 here and 1 up here. So I'm going to go ahead and punch those. And when I punch these, I've talked you through punching with the punches many times, but I'll talk you through the next one. You see that they stay attached, and that just means that when we get finished with this, we're going to cut them off of our paper. It's not a big deal. It's just going to make the design look a little bit different. And I've got just a touch of an edge there. Now, when I'm punching with this, I don't punch and then immediately cut off. If I need more than 1, I go ahead and flip my paper and do it again. So we're lining up on the black line that's on the front of the punch. You can line up on either side, depending on if you work left-handed or right-handed. You punch, and then you're sliding down until the blue covers up the snowflakes that are behind there. Now we'll pull out our 12-inch trimmer. And when I'm cutting these off the paper, I often want just a tiny little border to go with it. So what I tend to do is slide till I'm just past the cutting line, maybe even with this one. Now, a lot of them have an edge here, and you can line that edge up and then cut below it. This one doesn't, because these snowflakes dip. So I want to make sure I get all of my snowflakes past the cutting line. And to me, the easiest way to do that on this one would be to make sure the bottom of these big snowflakes gets past that gray mat, just right past the edge of the gray mat. that gives me some standard to make these somewhat even. And that's kind of my goal, is to make them even. Now I'm checking that top and bottom to make sure it's straight. And when I cut that, I've cut just below those little bitty snowflakes. Now I'm going to flip this over and do the same thing. And because I figured out a lineup point, that's going to make these look so much better. They're going to match, and I'm not going to have to keep trimming down and trimming down and trimming down to make them match up. So see, they're about the same size. So we've got 3 of those borders. And because I've already changed up the sketch, here is where it could get a little tricky. I'm just going to set one of these aside. But what I'm looking at is the borders inside this banner, this strip that's going to go across here. And my borders are going to go up and down like this. I think they're going to be wider than what it shows inside there. So let's look. K is that piece, and that piece is 2 inches wide. Now, if I take these and measure them, I have a feeling we're going to be much larger than 2 inches wide, because I use a big punch. Yeah, we're looking at about 3 inches wide on that. So when I cut this K piece right here, I'm going to be okay because I'm not doing the mats. But I'm going to cut that 3 inches wide instead of 2. And I hope that makes sense, the reasoning behind that. I'm glad I thought of that before I cut it, or I'd be really disappointed in myself. So I'm going 3 inches wide on this piece that is K. And I realize I'm jumping all over the place. I just have to customize it to make it work for me. All right. Now I am going to go ahead and cut this LMNOP because those parts I know I'm going to use. And I'll show you why in a minute. So those are going to be 2.5 by 2.5 inch. And remember, I told you the first measurement is always how far you're going to slide it on your trimmer. And then the second one would be when you rotate your paper. So we've got a 2.5. And we're cutting 2 2.5s out of this. Now, I probably should have mentioned on this, you need to like both sides of this paper because it's going to tell you that part of it's a reverse. So we've got 2 of those. And then this should be 2.5 by 7, and it is. And it tells us we're going to use the reverse side on that. Now, in looking at our sketch, there are dotted lines here, corner to corner, which means we're going to cut these to make triangles. So I'm just going to turn that. I'm lining 1 point up on this first cut line, the furthest to the left cutting line, and the other point on the top of that. And you just slice and you get your triangles. And it shows me, looks like 2 of those are going to be reversed, but we'll play with that in just a minute. And I need a 1 by 12 inch strip of this. And again, it calls for the reverse. So I'll flip it over after I cut it, in case I want to use the reverse. If I don't, that's okay too. So what we've got going right now is, do y'all see what I just did? If you're paying attention, you did. That was my 3 inch piece that I had cut down to put my border on. I just chopped it into a 1 inch by 2 inch. All right, we'll cut it again. Fortunately, I have more paper. Oh, y'all, some days. All right, so there's my 3 inch width to put these on. And this is extra for now. Now, let me see what other parts of this we're missing, because so much of it is tied up in these little triangles here and your borders. The rest of it is really, really simple. We've got this border, but we're going to need one more border behind that. And that one is the 2.5 on here. So there's a 1/2 inch difference. We are going to make ours 3.5 because remember, mine is 3. So this is going to be a 3.5. But let me look at this. If I put this border onto this paper, It doesn't really show up a whole lot. It's kind of pretty in the monochromatic sense. You know what? My first thought was not to use this, but now I think I will. Let's go at 3.5 on this. I thought I would back it with the brown, and I may go back and still do that. We'll see in a minute. So we've got this 3.5 that's going to be the back of that border. Remember, mine's much wider, but we still need our little triangles here to make those pretty little triangle designs. And again, these are 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. There's a 2.5, and we're cutting a 2.5 to make sure I get to the half, and another 2.5. And then what we're left with is another 2.5 by 7. We can check the measurements on that. That one's good. And then I'm looking right here. It's 2 more 4 by 6 mats, which I really don't need. So it looks like we may have the bulk of the pieces cut. I think I'm still going to have to do at least one border punch up there. But let's start laying this out and see what we've even got. I'm going to pull my background sheets back out. I didn't go nearly as busy on my background as they did. I felt like their background was a little bit much for me. You may love it, and that's fine. Now this, I think I may keep that like that. And it goes right along the top. It said use the reverse, but, you know, depends on which you start with as to which side is the reverse. We're going to put this border over here, and we've got that, and then this, and then my border punched, or my punched border is going to go onto that. It's a really, really soft look, and I think I kind of like it, but I'm already thinking in my head I may add something to that. Then we've got some of our little triangles, and I didn't cut these 2 in half. Remember, we're cutting on the diagonal, and you can use that with your 12-inch trimmer. You can do that with your 12-inch trimmer or with your photo trimmer, either way. Just lining my points up on the cutting edge. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We should have all of those done. All right, let me move this piece of paper out of the way for now. If you're looking at the sketch, these are going to be side pieces over here. And because that makes my branches go sideways, I'll probably use that on the green side instead. I mean, on the brown side instead. And then I'm looking at a border right here. And it showed doing a double border there. I don't really think I want to do a double border, but I do have a plan for that spot. And I'm just going to try this and see what I think, because I think those are going to show up really pretty on that brown. And I am going to leave just a touch of a brown edge on here when I tape this down, just so we've got a little bit more brown showing behind there too. And let me see if it makes a difference which way I flip my snowflakes as to whether they look better one way or the other. Yeah, they fit together better when I flip that a little bit. So I am going that way with that. But I don't want to stick this on the page yet until I've stuck all of these triangles on there. And basically all you're doing is starting at the edge. Theirs all touch the bottom right here, so I'm going to plan to do that as well. And you can tell the first one is scooted over, so you don't get so much empty space here. So I'm going to scoot that over, and I'm going to lay these out first and just see what I like. You know, I may not like the way they look certain ways, and so we may need to go back and do something different. I don't love this green pattern here, so I have a feeling I'm going to end up doing more of the others rather than that green pattern. That's the fun thing about these recipes. And I know I told you all the time with your sketches, make it your own. You can do that with the recipes too. If you want to follow as is, that's great. It makes beautiful pages. It's just that some things I'm real picky about. Sometimes I don't like both sides of my paper, which causes a problem when it says flip to the reverse side. And I just have to go a little bit different with it. All right, I think one more brown, and I like this look right here. I like that so much better than using this green pattern on that. So let me cut one more of these 2.5 by 2.5. And I know I've mentioned to you before, but I tend to keep my length as long as possible. Even if it's just enough to make a tiny border down the road, I'll put that back in my Nordic winter pack. And I'm sure I'll get a border out of that before long, especially if it keeps this cold. I know some of you have talked to me about snow. One lady from Australia said that she and her husband had gotten to see, did they tell me they got to see their first snow, or they had never seen a snow? I can't remember, y'all. I get a lot of comments, and sometimes I can't remember. We don't get much snow in North Alabama. We did get one, you know, last week when I was gone. Week before last, whenever that was. Of course, I was out of town, so I didn't get to see it. But I did get lots of pictures from my friends, so that was fun. All right, so I've got the diamond brown leaves, diamond brown leaves, diamond brown. So I've got my pattern worked out here. Let's go ahead and tape these down, and then we'll work on our other pieces for just a minute. I'm just going to use my regular tape. Repo would be great with this too, because you've got those points right there on the bottom of your paper. And if you're worried about those popping up, or you're not going to page protector it very quickly, you probably need to use repo on the points. Now here's where I think it could get a little dicey, is making sure that my spacing is going to be the same, so it looks uniform across. And I am eyeballing that. I mean, I can already tell this diamond is not even quite as tall as that one, so obviously I'm off a little already. Now I'm looking here to make sure this spacing is complementary to that spacing. When I first looked at this recipe, I thought these were just strips of paper, and I think you could almost do it with just strips rather than cutting triangles, but that's just too much. It's too much for me to change the whole thing up just to show you what I thought it was. And when you see that these don't look even across the top, don't worry about that. We're going to take care of it. And then end with that brown. Now here, if I had used repositionable tape, they would be much easier to pick up and move around if I needed to. I actually think those are pretty good. I'm going to grab my scissors real quick and just snip the end off of this and off of that. It doesn't look like much yet, but let's put this border on top of that. I think that's where we're going to start seeing this page come alive. And because mine are not even at the tops, I'm just going to slide this down enough to cover up any gaps I may have. And this is where that 13-inch mat would come in so handy. So let me grab that. So if I lay this down on my mat and just line my paper up really well, and then I'm checking the bottom of this, it's at 1/4 away from that, 1/4 away from that. So I am straight. Just check the tops, make sure the tops are straight. Yay! For a change, I got something straight without even trying. Too hard. We're going to add this brown back in. Now remember, we flipped this because, man, the contrast is so much better this way, particularly when we put those pretty little snowflakes on. And again, I'm looking at measurements side to side just to make sure I'm getting that even. And then let's pull out our mat and our repo tape for our pretty little snowflakes. And I'm making sure that the way I had laid these out, doing them opposite, you can see this snowflake dips a little more, so it covers in this space better that way. So for a change, I really do have to flip over a cardstock to put my tape on it. And I remember saying I was going to leave just a little brown border there. that little brown border makes it look like we've extra layered, but we didn't really. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to leave just a little brown border along the bottom there. That makes these two middle borders almost touch. I'm already thinking in my head 2 embellishments because you know how I love embellishments. And on this, they had another border through the middle. Because mine is an attached border, I didn't want to do that. But we may add something pretty right there in just a second. All right, let's get this other side taped down. And one thing that I'm noticing is that this and our snowflakes kind of fade in together. Now, I did want a part of this pine bough paper here because that's actually the piece that draws all my colors together. But if I put this straight on there, we're going to kind of lose that. So I think what I'd like to do is go back and cut just a thin piece of this stripe and add it in. And I'm going to make that about 1/4 inch, which is to the edge of my gray mat. And I'm going to cut a couple of those. You can see this paper is not long enough to go all the way across that page. And I'm going to have to use that repositionable tape because this is so very thin. Okay, that's going to make such a pretty difference there. There's just something about adding a contrast piece that makes such a big difference when you're doing pages like this. And here I'm just overlapping. I just overlapped where the stripes were there. And then we're going to go back and add our snowflake on. And despite my best efforts to make this really, really time consuming, this is coming together really nicely. Can't say quickly, but nicely. So I'll tell you this because y'all love it when I mess up and I tell you what I did. I initially planned to use a border maker cartridge, a detached border maker cartridge, just like the directions told me to. And I had one out and I started looking at it. And I tried to make myself like the idea of it, and I just didn't. So when I went with this border punch, yeah, I had to change things up. I had to pivot a little bit, but I love the effect of this so much more than I would have if I had gone with a border maker cartridge I didn't love just because the directions told me to. So I'm going to go ahead and stick these 2 mats down using my regular tape. And our directions showed them up. But here again, I've got a problem because look at our directions. Everything on the bottom is empty and all of it's really heavy on design on the top. So I'm going to go down with mine instead. And I decided to flip this to the brown just for the contrast over here. We're going to set it inside that one just a little bit. But I do think I'll feel better about the page when there's something going on down at the bottom as well. This one's really heavy on the bottom with design. This one's a lot heavier on the top with design. And then let's look at the pictures we've got laid out. And let me show you what I've got. So on this trip with their buddies, I've got two main events. There's one set just at the house where they all stayed. And then there's one set where they went to the train. And because I matted these in white, they're not going to need any extra matting. Oh, I love this. I did opt to go with the more neutral colors here, even though you got the red train in the picture, because everything about these are more neutral. The kids dress in neutral. The mountain pictures are very neutral because it was overcast, kind of dreary. And I felt like it was not a good time to pull out some red paper to match this train. And I think I'm going to be real glad about that. Sometimes you just kind of have to ignore some of the colors in your photos, especially when you're doing 2 things that are not color coordinated on a double spread. Now here they have 2 4x6 pictures set up and down. Mine don't work that way. So I developed like this. And I'm going to go ahead and put those on. My pictures also, because I developed them myself, are not as tall as a 4x6. They're more a digital size, like maybe 5.5 tall, which works out great because my border ended up so much wider. And I'm going to try to line up the tops of these. Make that symmetrical. I'm not really lining anything up on the opposite page because the pages are very different. And I'm just going to set their little buddies right here. And I'm already thinking this is a great place to add a little journaling box because I don't need to say a whole lot. All right, so there's the double spread so far. Let's look at some embellishments. Now, looking at Nordic Winter, one of the things in there was this cabin. It mimics the top of this one. The windows are almost the same. The colors are a little different, but man, is that perfect. I thought I would never get to use that cabin, and then my kids sent me some pictures. There are several other things in here that I don't know that any of them really go a whole lot, and all I know here is there's a train. I don't know what this event was. I don't know if they rode the train. I have to get some details when they get home. But this would make a nice little journaling box. I'll just cut that down to fit that spot. And when I do that, I may want to take the cabin to the side over here. That's what I'm looking at. And let's look at some stickers because I know I still have some stickers left. Oh, that's pretty. Some of this outdoorsy stuff is nice. So let me go ahead and cut this journal box down so we'll know what kind of space we're looking at right there. I'm trying to think. I think I may want to even keep that on there on the side of it. I don't need that extra height there, but it might work to my advantage to leave it for now. And this is going to be a really small journal space. Again, when I don't go on the trip, I don't really have a lot to say about it. Sometimes even when I go on the trip, I don't have a lot to say about it. Yeah, I like that. I am going to keep just a piece of this. So when they tell me about the train, I can do something there. All right, so we've got our cabin. We've got a journaling spot here and here. I'm kind of thinking this over here maybe. I don't want to cover up the boxes completely. So I think I'll just put that kind of down the side of that. Just to give me a little something over there. And let me see what I've got with words. Downtime at the cabin. That looks good. All snuggled up. That would be great for their picture. Staying warm. Downtime at the cabin. That's good with all their friends. And then even this cabin, sweet cabin, would be nice up there. And that's where I'm going to stop on these. So let me grab my tape again. I'm going to stick this journal box down. I'm going to get some foam squares, and you knew those were coming. And that's just going to go right over the edge here. Because this is already an embellishment, one foam square is going to be fine for it. And part of the reason I put it here was to make your eye go from here to here, kind of in a triangular shape as you move across your page. You look at the pictures and journaling, you see the cabin, you move back up to pictures and journaling. And we need our anti-stick tool for these. Now let me just tell you, if you do not have anti-stick powder, this came out, then it was gone, and we've heard that it may come back, but we don't really know when. I do have several of these. I ordered extras, and I offered them to my in-person customers this weekend and sold a couple. But if you just really need some anti-stick powder, if you will email me at tilleyps@gmail.com, we will see what we can do to get you some of that. It's either $7 or $8 for a container. And from what I understand, this container is going to last a very, very long time. So I'm excited about that. And I don't think it would cost very much to ship. It's not heavy at all, and I think we could ship it pretty cheaply. So if you need some anti-stick powder, I have a few of those left. Just contact me and we'll check shipping costs to your zip code and see what we can do to get you some of that. People said to me the other day, why would you use that? I mean, if it's a sticker, why not just stick it down? There is just something to be said for popping those up a little bit. It just creates a totally different look to me. Now this downtime at the cabin, I'm going to add into this, and it's going to be overlapping this a little bit. So I really only need a foam square on this outside edge that's not going to be touching anything. If I foam squared here too, it would make it a double thickness, and I don't really want that. So I'm just adding a foam square on this outside edge. I'm going to add a tack of repositionable tape right there just to hold it down. And that holds it onto the embellishment I've already got foam squared. And then we've got one more, this Cabin Sweet Cabin. Now, one thing I did do as I was peeling off my scraps, taking the scraps from my punch, was I kept some of these little snowflakes just to see if I might want to add some of them in or if it would be too busy. And I'm thinking that I kind of like it. I am going to foam square this bigger one. Now these were just punched out of my white shimmer. And it's just the punch leftovers, punch confetti, punch poop, some people call it, whatever you want to call it. This one I'm just going to stick down. And maybe add a couple over here as well. Now there are some teeny tiny ones on there as well. I may hate myself, but we'll try those with our repo tape. Something about having 3 over there makes me feel better too. So I'm going to stick that one down. Grab one that's just a little bit bigger. And then maybe one more of the smaller ones. If you have little glue pens, that would be a good place to use a glue pen. And I think I need to cluster these a little more closely. And then maybe stick a big one up there. So I didn't throw away all that punch confetti this time because I knew there was a chance I might want to use some of those. All right. So we finally had this sketch done with a lot of changes. The overall look is very similar, but we changed the borders we used and how we use those. We added in a little strip here to make that look a little different, and then we moved this design down. Overall, I'm extremely pleased with the effect, and this is project recipe number 5, page 14 in your project recipe book. And until I see you next time, stay warm and happy scrapping.